to talk about some art principles. The one we're going to talk about, one of the principles we're going to talk about today is ambiguity. Now, if we're talking about art, and photography is art, or it can be art, then we should be utilizing some of those same principles of art that are used in other art media. You know, they're universal. And so ambiguity is one of them. And you're saying to yourself, Self, what is he talking about, ambiguity? Well, I'd be willing to bet that all of you have seen some artwork, a painting or a drawing, that you look at it and you say, oh my God, what is that? Well, what it is it's ambiguous. And then you may look at it a little bit harder, and it's like, now I see it. Now I get it. So it becomes a visual puzzle, and that's what ambiguity is. It's a visual puzzle that the viewer has to solve. And that's the handle that gets you into the work, is it makes you look to have to try and solve that visual puzzle. So what I'm going to do today is share with you some photographs that are ambiguous, and I'll also tell you about how they were made, because, you know, I believe in sharing information. It's not, I don't want to have deep, dark secrets about how I make my photographs. And I think of each photograph as like a invention. And that's what we do as artists, if you call yourself an artist, is each time you make a photograph, it's an invention. It's not like every other photograph that's been made, hopefully not. And so you're inventing, how am I going to do, or what am I going to do to make this photograph beautiful or interesting or ambiguous in this instance? So the first one I'm going to show you is eggshells on fabric. Now, I choose to use subjects that are unusual. Sometimes they're like trash, eggshells, that's what we throw in the trash, or leaves that we sweep up, you know. And so oftentimes I'm using photographs that are trash, because beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And so what I try and do is take something that is not generally seen, oftentimes try and take things that are not generally seen as beautiful or interesting to look at, and approach them in a different way. The visual puzzle. So what I've done here is I've placed these eggshells on black fabric. And I place the fabric around them, and the light's coming from underneath. I've constructed a little table in my little studio where I have an opening in the table, and I can put glass or plastic across the opening, and I put the light underneath. And that's what's happening here. The light's coming from underneath. And it's a small spotlight, so I can concentrate the light in one area, and the light doesn't necessarily fall around the edges, because I want the center to be lighter than the edges, because our eyes have a tendency to go to the lightest area of the photograph, and we can control that. And so that's what I've done. So it's simply light coming up through these eggshells and through the fabric. And it almost has an abstract appearance to it. But when you look closely, it's obvious that it's eggshells. The next one I have is of the shadow of scissors against frosted acetate. This is simply a sheet of glass, and frosted acetate is taped to the sheet of glass, and I have scissors in a jar, and I press the jar up against the frosted acetate, and you can see where the scissor has made contact with frosted acetate because that's the only thing that is sharp. And you can kind of generally make out a part of the handle of the scissors. And the jar itself, because that's pressed against the acetate also, forms this kind of like abstract little line going down. So you have to kind of look at it and figure out what this is. So there is the ambiguity in that photograph. The next one I'm going to show you is a raw egg in a saucer, in a glass saucer. And it's simply sat down on a white background. And so the saucer becomes a container, a visual container, like a secondary frame for the egg. So whenever we use circular objects in a photograph, and we put our subject on that circular object, that circular object acts as a secondary frame to get us to focus our attention in that one area. But what I did was make striations in light coming from one direction. And those striations make the photograph ambiguous. So you see we have this ambiguity using this raw egg in this dish and this plate. Now I use these glass plates for several photographs. The next one I'm going to show you is several glass plates stacked together. You don't see the entire plate. You see edges of the plate. And a phenomena that happens when you're lighting glass or clear objects is you see the edges, but you don't see the glass. You see through it. What I chose to do is put bubbles on one of these plates. And so I blew bubbles. And I have 3 bubbles that have merged together. When you're photographing objects, you generally want to have odd numbers like 3, 5, 7. Because odd number things are more interesting to look at than even number things. It becomes too sedate or too symmetrical when you use even numbers. So I had 3 bubbles that merge together, and you can see the edge of the bubbles just like you see the edge of the plates, because bubbles are clear just like glass, and you can only see the edges of them. So this gives us our ambiguity, because I'd be willing to bet when you first saw this that you didn't realize what it was. But it's beautiful. But it forces you to look so you can figure it out. And that's the whole point. So, if you like this video, give it a like, a thumbs up. Watch more of my videos. You can also find me on Instagram. And we're going to leave this here. And I look forward to seeing you with the next program talking about one of the principles of art, the next principle of art. So, here we go.